Hello, my name is Paul Teague from paulteague.com and welcome to Using Webinars for Business. Coming up in this presentation over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking you through how you can attract new leads and prospects into your business using webinars, which are a fabulous tool. You'll get bigger results and more sales using this technique. Webinars can be used also not just for sales, but you could use them to deliver training, you could use them for product demonstrations, and I've even known people use them to conduct job interviews. The great thing about webinars is that you could do the work once, record the webinar, and then you can profit time and time again. So if you ever get a presentation that works really well and converts browsers to buyers, then you should record it and you should automate it in your business. And I'll be showing you how to do that in the presentation today. Also, webinars can help to establish you as the go-to expert in your field because people respect them, because they're so authoritative, because they look great sitting on your website or your Facebook page or your YouTube channel. Webinars are really, really effective in branding you and making you the go-to person and authority in your field. In the presentation, I'm going to get to grips with all the basics. So I'll talk to you about the best equipment to use for webinars. I'll talk you through the most effective software available. There are many, many webinar softwares on the market. I've tried virtually all of them at some point or another, and I'll talk you through which I think are the best and the most robust for your business. I'll also guide you through the best ways to get started straight away. I wouldn't want you to be put off by webinars. I wouldn't want you to think that there's too much tech involved or that you need any particular skills. If you can stand up and give a basic presentation to a group of people, maybe to a group of people in the Chamber of Commerce, if you're happy doing that, then you can certainly do webinars and make them work in your business. Now, just to give you a little bit of information about my background, I come from a broadcasting background, which is why I was so quick to move into webinars. It's very much just like sitting on the radio and doing a broadcasting presentation. So I worked for the BBC between 1991 and 2012. Much of that was presenting daily radio shows between 1991 and the year 2000. Now, clearly, there are lots of differences between broadcasting in a live radio environment and then broadcasting as I am right now, or recording as I am right now, sitting in a study at home. But webinars are incredible. They can bring that live, personable experience, and you can deliver it. You don't have to do it from a radio studio. You can do it from your kitchen table, quite literally. Now, I've done a lot of work with webinars. I've even published a book about them. It's available on all those outlets that you can see on your screen now. It's called Using Webinars for Business. So I've put all my knowledge about webinars and condensed it into that single book. So I've got quite a lot of experience running live webinars and also teaching about this system as well. Okay, so let's start with the basics. Why should you be using webinars in your business? Well, the great thing about them is they're fast. You can set them up in a couple of minutes. I've said 5 minutes there, but that's a generous time allocation. They're very fast to set up, very straightforward. Nothing difficult to do here. If you have the web abilities to register for a website, put your email address in and click sign up, then you're good to go. There's nothing more difficult than that involved in using these third-party software services. They're very tech-free. Why I like webinars is if you're new to business, if you don't even have a website yet or a Facebook page, the great thing about webinars is you could start right now. You could be doing a webinar by the end of today, and you don't actually need to have a website of your own to get started. So the barriers to entry are very low. The other thing you don't need is a list of subscribers, and by that I mean an existing customer database. Now, clearly, depending on how well established your own business is, you may have a list of customers already that you can market your webinars to. But if you don't have any kind of customer base at all, don't worry about that. You can still use webinars and you can still promote the webinars on social media. You don't need to have a product of your own for webinars. One of the ways that I've used them is by joint venturing with other people who've got a product to sell. I host the webinar, maybe bring the crowd or the customers or the prospects to the event, and then the other person will provide the product and we split it 50-50 on the sale. So that's how I've made most of my sales on webinars, not always selling my own products, but selling other people's products. So again, it's a great way to get started. Even if you haven't got a product of your own yet, you can still sell products which are related to your expertise or your industry. And one of the things I really like about webinars, I've already mentioned this, is you can do them sitting at the kitchen table, but you can broadcast to a worldwide audience. So I've done live events and they're great fun with people in the States, in New Zealand, in Australia, in the Philippines, people all over the world. And I've been sitting at my kitchen table or my study desk in Carlisle and I can talk to people live throughout the world. So I really do like it for that. And all you need, of course, is a broadband connection and a laptop. The other fabulous thing about webinars, and I think this needs to be a standard when you're thinking about anything on the web nowadays, you need to be asking yourself, does this work on mobile devices? Can I access this on my mobile phone or my tablet? Webinars are mobile device friendly, so they're fit for purpose in the modern online world. Let's stay with the basics, and just in case you've never attended a webinar or held a webinar, been part of a webinar, let me just talk you through what they are, because it's very important that we distinguish between a webinar and just a standard video. The difference between that and a webinar is that a webinar is a live or as live event. Now, if it doesn't have that live element to it, that interactive element, then it's just a one-way message. It's a one-way process, and that's just a video that you could put on YouTube. So webinars are interactive. They're usually live, or you can give the impression that they're live. I'm going to talk about webinar automation towards the end of this presentation, and you can create webinars that sound like they're live, and they can still, even with modern software, feel like they're interactive, but you don't need to be there. This whole process can take part on automatic. A webinar is a visual and or an audio presentation delivered via the web. Usually it will be visual. They're best when they're visual. Either we can see your face talking to us, or as I'm doing right now, presenting slides, but doing it live and taking questions and answers. Now, one of the ways I've used webinars, because I'm into geeky things, I often do live demonstrations. I show people how to do things on Facebook, on Twitter, how to build websites. And I do that demonstration on live webinars where people can watch what I'm doing on the screen and then ask questions as I'm doing it. So all you need to think about is, in your business, in your profession, how might you use webinars? They can be presented simultaneously to any number of participants anywhere in the world. So webinars usually have time zone facilities built in, so that if you register for one of my webinars, it will convert the time zone so you know when to log on and access my presentation wherever you are in the world. Now, I say any number, there is some qualification to that, because it depends on the software that you use and it depends on the package that you've paid for. So the general rule of thumb with webinars is the more people you have attending a webinar, the more you're going to pay for that service. And of the paid services, 1,000 people is generally the maximum number of people that you can get on a webinar. Now, if you get 1,000 people on a webinar, you're doing very well. I think the most I've ever had when I was internet marketing, I think we had about 1,200, 1,300 registered. But even though you have registrations at that level, you don't usually get that number of attendees. So it usually drops off by about a third or more. So I think with about 1,300 registrations, I think we had about 700-800 attendees. So it's quite hard to fill a webinar with 1,000 people. Believe me, I've tried and I've never actually quite made it to the 1,000. We've never had what's called a webinar lockout. So that's something that I aspire to achieve in my online career. The other thing about webinars is that they allow the speaker or speakers to share their slides, almost like I'm doing with you now on this video. A live PC screen, you can show them your notes, you can play in live videos or audio if you want to, or any other kind of multimedia content. They really are multimedia events these days. And with broadband, of course, this is all even more possible. And the great thing about webinars, the big difference between a webinar and a video, is that we've got that lovely live interaction. People can chat, they can write little notes in the chat boxes, or you could just bring them live on air if you want and have a conversation with them and talk to them via their microphone. It doesn't matter where they are in the world. The better the broadband speeds that we have, the more we can do with fewer delays, depending on where we are in the world. Let's talk about then the basic anatomy of a webinar now. And I want you to think of a webinar like a TV or a radio show. It's broadcast from your PC or laptop and you're the host. You're the person in charge. You're monitoring affairs and bringing them together. Using the wide choice of webinar services that are available, you can broadcast wherever you are, hotel room, kitchen, lounge, out in the garden if you can get broadband that far, wherever you want to people all over the world. They're fabulous things. You can use webinars to teach people virtually anything or demonstrate virtually anything. You can interview expert guests. It could just be like a radio interview if you want, and just sharing expertise and ideas. Or you can make sales presentations on webinars. They really are very versatile. The important thing is you don't have to be an expert to run webinars. And please believe me when I say you don't need to have technical experience. I'm going to talk you through all the basics today in the next 40 minutes or so, and you'll see how straightforward it is to do this. Let's talk about then how we could use webinars. I just want you to get thinking about how you might use them in your business. The obvious, I guess, is sales presentations. We can sell whatever our business or our expertise is. I use webinars a lot. I've used them for sales presentations, but most often I use them for teaching and training presentations. So if you attended one of my live webinars, it would look a lot of the time exactly like what you're seeing on the screen here. The only difference is you would be able to ask me questions as we went along. It would be more interactive. So if I raised something and you said, oh, hang on a minute, Paul, what about this? I would be able to answer that as we went along. But it would look pretty well much like it is now, or I would be demonstrating things on the screen. But I love webinars for teaching. They're fantastic for that. They're brilliant for multi-attendee meetings. You can also use them just for 4 or 5 people, 10 people if you want, around the country. So it will save people jumping on trains at great expense and paying for hotels. You can just share slides, share ideas. You can even have whiteboards on some webinar softwares which allow you to share your ideas live and simultaneously. So they don't have to be for thousands of people or hundreds of people. They can just be for a small group of people having a live interactive meeting online. You can use them for product demonstrations, and you can even, if you want to, I'll show you how to do this when we talk about the equipment. You could even just set up a webcam and you could demonstrate how to change a car tyre on a webinar if you wanted to. It doesn't really matter what your profession is, so long as you can stand in front of a camera and show what it is you do. If you're a flower arranger, you're a car mechanic, so long as we can get a camera view and we can get a microphone so that you can commentate and explain what you're doing, you could put that on a webinar. Webinars are great for engaging prospects. We all know that we have to take prospects through a journey, and we usually have to touch base with them on several occasions before they become buyers. To turn them from browsers to buyers. And the great thing about webinars is we can use them to handle objections. Now, if we just have a sales video, there's no interactivity there. So if somebody thinks, well, okay, that looks good, but what about this? They have to engage with you by telephoning you or emailing you to ask a question. On webinars, it's much less of a commitment if they want to ask questions, and they can ask questions among a group of other people who are also asking questions. So it's less intimidating for that buying process. So they're great for engaging prospects and turning prospects into customers. I also use webinars for expert positioning. So you would teach something, you'd show people about Facebook or LinkedIn, this is how I use it, and you can brand yourself as the expert in the field by sharing great information about your profession. And I'm very keen on expert positioning with webinars. They're very effective for doing that. Some people use webinars for job interviews. Once again, if you're interviewing somebody who's several miles away, you don't have to get involved, certainly for the initial interviews, in train journeys or plane journeys and hotels and all the expense. You can actually run interviews and see people face to face using webinar software, and you can give them tests and exercises, and they can make presentations to you via live webinars. So I'd also urge you to think about them as maybe a cost saving measure. And for initial interviews, certainly, obviously you'd always want to see somebody face to face eventually, but for initial interviews you may find them very useful for screening people and allowing them still to do the kind of things that we do at those sessions, doing presentations. We can also use webinars when we automate them for automated leads capture. Now, if you ever have a webinar that goes very well, maybe it converts very well, or you get a great response from prospects to it, then I would urge you to automate that process. And I'll talk to you about an automation software which just allows you to use what we call the as live recording of your presentation, and it feels like it's a live event. You can even take questions from people. it feels like they're part of a live event, but they can ask questions and they just get emailed to you so you can respond to them at a time of your choosing. So automation is a great thing to use when you record and when you run webinars. Webinars convert prospects, browsers, into buyers big time. The industry standard is accepted on a sales page to be about 1% conversion. Now, by conversion, I mean that somebody lands on your website or your sales page in the first place. They take a look at whatever your sales message is. And then on average, if you've done nothing special at all, about 1 in 100 people will buy from that sales page. So you've got to be sending a lot of traffic to a sales page just to hit that 1% conversion rate. Now, when I talk about conversions in this presentation, I always like to qualify this, because when I'm doing teaching one-to-one or in face-to-face situations, there are usually a couple of charities in the room. And I always say to people, a conversion is whatever your most desirable action is in your business. So if you're a charity, for instance, it might be recruiting new volunteers for the charity shop. It doesn't have to be a conversion, doesn't have to be sales related. It just has to be related to whatever outcome you want from your sales or your website process. Now, most of the time, it's going to be about making a sale or getting somebody to sign up for a demonstration or something like that, but it doesn't have to be money related. With webinars, the average conversion rate is generally accepted to be 10 times more, 10% or more in webinars. They work particularly well with higher ticket sales, where people will have a lot of questions and objections. It's much easier to sell directly from a webinar. But look at that difference, 1% to 10% or more. Can you afford not to be using webinars in your business if those are the averages that people are achieving through webinars? Now, those are just average figures. If you get a really great webinar that converts and you're able to deliver that to your audience, you'll probably find that you get much higher conversion rates than that. Let's talk about the equipment you need then. I did say that this wasn't a technical thing to do, and it really isn't. You can do it very, very simply without any technical equipment at all. The first thing we've obviously got to have is access to a laptop or a PC. It doesn't matter which one. I did them for years on a laptop. I use a PC these days just because that's what my rig is, but I used PCs quite happily for many years when I started doing webinar presentations. You've got to have some form of microphone. Now, in my illustration there, that's quite a posh microphone. That would probably cost about £60, I would guess. I'm going to show you the equipment that you could use in a moment or two. You do not have to spend a lot of money on a microphone. Clearly, the better the microphone is, the better quality the audio is going to be. Now, you can use telephone lines to present webinars if you want to. People usually resort to a telephone line if they're stuck in a hotel with a terrible broadband connection, or if they're in a bad broadband area. But what I've found is that very accomplished webinar presenters have converted less on the webinar when they're using telephones. The audio is crackly. It really doesn't resonate as well with the audience. So I would always avoid using the telephone option when you're doing webinars and using the softwares. The other thing you're going to need, obviously, is you. We need someone to present and to manage the webinar. We need a webinar delivery service. That's going to be the software that we use. And we need a broadband connection. Hopefully, but you never know in Cumbria, hopefully nobody's still restricted to narrowband connections. Hopefully you've got access to some form of broadband, and many people in Cumbria will have super fast broadband. Now, I've found webinars so much easier ever since I got super fast broadband, but I did them for many years quite happily using just standard broadband. So don't be put off if you haven't got super fast yet. It's fine so long as you're on a broadband connection. I think you would struggle if you were on narrowband speeds. I want to show you what my software and my setup looks like. This is where I'm sitting right now. This is my desk right now. And yes, it really is as cluttered and as untidy as that. Everything's within a hand's reach, so it all works for me. People are usually horrified when they see this picture. But you can see that in my rig, I've got 2 screens here. You may not have 2 screens, and you do not have to have 2 screens for webinars. But as I'll explain later on, it does help if you do have 2 screens. It makes it much easier. And I'm going to show you a cheap software, very cheap software, that will allow you, if you're using just a laptop, to create 2 screens using a spare laptop maybe that another family member has got. And this is how I started doing webinars a couple of years ago when I didn't have dual screens. So you can still do these on single screens. You don't have to have dual screens. This is just my setup. So you'll see that we've got dual screens there, and on the left hand side of the screen we've got my presentation, so I can be scrolling through the presentation and talking through the notes, much as I'm doing right now. And on the right hand screen you can see that I've got the webinar software. Now, those are the little control panels that you get with my favorite webinar software, and it's easier to have those on a separate screen, so you can monitor the chat box and see what people are talking about, and I can just monitor what people are seeing on their screens. It's just a lot easier if you've got that on a separate screen. Now, for years I did it all on one screen, and those little panels were just tucked to the right hand side. It's perfectly okay to do that. I did it for a couple of years when I started with webinars, but it's much easier if you've got dual screens. The other thing you'll see there is I've got a microphone boom arm. That's what I prefer. I prefer not to have the microphone on the desk because I tend to fidget and bang it, and you can pick up that vibration on the microphone. So I tend to have it set up the way that it used to work when I was on the radio, where I've got a boom arm and I can just position it where I want to. The other thing you'll see, I've got a microphone windshield there. That's very important so we don't get the pops when we're using P words. We don't want to get that. So that shield is usually quite nice. It just improves the quality of the audio. I've got headphones there. Never listen on a speaker because you'll get feedback. If you're going to monitor or you're going to talk to people, you need to listen to what people are saying. Maybe you're interviewing them as part of your webinar. It's best done on headphones. Don't put it through a speaker because you'll get that horrible howl round that you get sometimes. You sometimes hear it on the radio too. And then there's an essential item there. You'll see tea. Always important to have a drink when you're doing sustained presentations. If you do a presentation of 40 minutes to an hour, your voice will go croaky at some point. I have water here right now because I'm recording this over an hour. There's the sound effect to prove it. I always have water or tea just to oil the vocals. You will need it on a live webinar and you'll regret it if you don't bring a drink in with you. So, getting a little bit more focus there, there's my microphone setup. There's a microphone there. It plugs into my PC via a USB cable. Just plug it in and off we go. It's an AT2050 microphone. I'll talk about microphones in a moment. That is quite an expensive model. You don't need to get one like that. And you'll see that we've got the microphone windshield there. So it's a pretty straightforward setup with the exception of the microphone, and you can go cheaper with microphones. The microphone windshield and the boom arm, they weren't expensive pieces of equipment. Now on my second screen, I've just given you a close-up here of what the webinar software looks like. This is GoToWebinar. I'll talk to you about the software shortly. This is my favourite software. And GoToWebinar gives you all these little control panels, and I do like to have those control panels on a separate screen. It really does help me to do that. And I also use a software called Camtasia, which I'll talk to you about a little bit later, to record the webinars so that I can send out the replays to people who maybe missed it or weren't able to attend live. Now, it's always worth recording a webinar for the replay because on the best webinar I ever did, the most lucrative webinar I ever did, we made a lot of sales, over $100,000 of sales on that night, and about 50% of those sales came from the live event. The other 50% came from the replay. 50% of the sales, it was just slightly less than 50%, came from the replay. It's really important to have a replay for people who missed the live event because you can make a lot of sales from those. This is a little bit geeky, and I have put a note on here to say that it's a bit over the top for most users. I also use Audio Sponge in my study. I'm in a small study now. The floor is wooden, so I bought some carpet to put on the floor so it doesn't echo. I don't want it to sound like I'm broadcasting from a bathroom. And also I've got this audio sponge which I got cut to size, and it just fits within the window recess of my study. The reason I got that is I want to screen any dogs that are barking in the background in the neighbourhood, any bird sound. I mean, it doesn't screen everything, but it just is a little bit kinder when I'm recording audio. It just screens quite a lot of things out. And I do want it to sound as cozy and to create as much of that radio environment as I can. Now, this is OTT. It's over the top for most users. I'm just showing you how I set it up. I'm always trying to recreate the radio experience because that's the background I come from. The reality is it's very hard to do that using computers and USB cables and the kind of equipment that we have at home. But these are the things I do to do my best to recreate that quality audio. You certainly don't need Audio Sponge. I'm just showing you that as a little tip if you get very serious about this. What I would say, and the thing that you do need to know, is please don't ever broadcast webinars in great empty rooms that are echoey, because it sounds horrible. Try and get a small area, maybe put a screen behind you if it is a large area, just to try and make it sound a little bit more cozy and a bit less echoey. I think that's quite a useful tip to use if you are doing those presentations. Okay, moving on now to the equipment that you use. On a webinar, you can use the built-in microphone on your laptop or your PC. I don't really recommend it. If you just want to test webinars, it's fine. You don't have to get an external microphone, but the audio quality is not going to be great. So in order of priority, I'd say the phone is the worst priority. You can always actually just talk down a phone and the audio will come through your computer. It's all done with the magic. It's like a conference call. It's all done with the magic of the webinar softwares. Never use the phone. Only use the phone in an extreme crisis where the broadband has gone. That's when you have to use the phone, just to keep the thing going. The next in order of priority after the phone is the built-in microphones you get with laptops and PCs. They're not very good. They might be okay for Skype calls to family members and friends, but they're not great for formal professional presentations. And this is really what you need to have, what you can see on the screen now, as a bare minimum. It's just a standalone microphone. It plugs in with a USB cable, and they're about a £5. Logitech do lots of microphones and great plug-in equipment. And this is, I would say, the bare minimum if you're going to do a webinar. You need to get some form of external microphone. I started using one of these. It's about a £5, £10 at the most. Very low budget microphone, but please, if you're going to do a webinar professionally to an audience of potential customers, please at least get something like this. Don't use the built-in versions. You can, if you want, have one of these built-in headphones and headsets, but if you use one of these, just beware, because they can get a little bit breathy when they're so close to your mouth. We can hear a lot of breath, and you might brush them quite a lot with your hand. They can create quite a lot of sound that we don't really want to hear on a professional presentation. So if you do have one of those microphones, just be aware that you might be creating a lot of extra sound that isn't very pleasant for the people listening or viewing to hear. Perfectly all right though. The quality is perfectly all right, so long as your microphone technique is fine. It's not too close to your face. Now, this is the sort of microphone that I prefer to use for podcasts or webinars. This is the Blue Microphone Snowball Omnidirectional Card-Eyed USB microphone. Now, if that doesn't make you run a mile, I don't know what will. It costs about £60 on Amazon. It's a good mid-range option. As you can see, it's mounted on the desk, that particular microphone. And I don't generally like desk-bound microphones because you do get that vibration. The microphone that I had originally, you'll see it closely in a moment, I used to have, it came with a desk stand, and I moved to a boom arm very quickly because I was getting too much vibration on it. But this microphone is a great mid-range option if the pro models I'm going to show you make you shudder when I show you the price. This is the microphone that I've got. I was quite horrified to see it cost £200 now. I did spend quite a lot on a microphone because in the early days of me working online, I was trying to recreate the radio quality that I was used to from broadcasting with the Beeb. I've given up with that now. You'd have to spend a lot of money to get that really, really good quality. But this is the microphone that I use after doing a lot of research. £200. I love the microphone, but I'll be honest with you, I've got a lot of years use out of that microphone. I wouldn't buy that now. I'd buy one of the other ones that I'm showing you now because they're cheaper and better and more versatile. This is one of the microphones that I would look at very seriously now if I was buying. It's £100 less. It's about £99 on Amazon. It's the Yeti USB microphone. It's very popular. It's used by a lot of internet marketers, podcasters and webinar hosts. You generally want to be looking for a microphone that's recommended by podcasters and webinar hosts because that's the kind of quality that we're after. And the Rode Podcaster, this is one that's become very popular nowadays. You see a lot of webinar hosts using these. And this one mounts nicely on a boom arm. It's about £140 on Amazon. I think this is probably the one that I would go for nowadays. It always looks a bit much when people are on webcams. Quite a large device, but it's what a lot of people are using and they get on extremely well with it. So I think if I were buying again now, and I'm only talking about people who are doing webinars seriously, that's probably the one that I would buy myself nowadays. That would probably be my recommended choice if you're not on a budget. If you are on a budget, probably go for that one. So that's microphones. Webcams that are built into your PC or laptop nowadays are fine. Most of them are HD, so they're very, very good quality, and they're usually absolutely fine. What I recommend is if you do use a webcam, usually at the beginning of a webinar, you'd put yourself on the webcam and just say hello, and then people would see what you look like. Usually I then take myself off the webcam so that people can just focus on my slides or my presentation. I try and use as few resources as possible when I'm presenting so that the speed and the delay is at a minimum. So a built-in webcam is absolutely fine. I foolishly, when I bought the dual screens that I've got, I didn't think to check whether they had webcams built in, and of course they didn't. So I've bought this. This is the webcam that I use. Wonderful little webcam. The quality is beautiful. It's an HD webcam. Beautiful, beautiful quality on the screen. It's about £15 on Amazon. I paid a little less for it because I've had it for a year or two. But it's the Logitech C270, a very basic webcam, but beautiful, beautiful, clean picture. And I just have that mounted at the top of my main screen on my PC. If you're planning to do live broadcasts, if you were a florist, for instance, and you wanted to have a static camera on you standing at a table showing us how to present and arrange flowers, then you're going to need something slightly more. You're going to want to mount that on a tripod. It's going to be a fixed camera. It's going to be a single camera view for a webinar. But this is the kind of camera that you need for that. And I'll show you in the next slide why you need a camera like this. This is the Logitech 920 HD. It's more than the webcam that I showed you on the previous slide. But why I recommend this camera is because it's got a tripod mount at the bottom of it. You do, if you're going to do that style of webinar where you're standing up demonstrating something, you do need to have that on a fixed tripod. We don't want wobbly cameras, and we want it fixed on you so that you're always nicely in frame and you can talk and demonstrate. So this is the kind of webcam that I would recommend for you. It doesn't cost an awful lot of money at all, and it will double up as a regular webcam as well. But the crucial bit there, the thing that you're going to need, is that little bracket there so that you can mount it on a tripod. And that's the one that I would recommend. I do like Logitech. They do some great equipment. So that's the basic equipment that you need. As you can see, you can go from about a £5 through to £200 with that equipment. Don't always think that paying more is better. Always read around, check the reviews. You don't always have to spend the most money to get the most effective tool for the job. We're going to need some software for this. And on the screen now, you can see on that little laptop image that I've put there, there are many, many softwares available. GoToWebinar, Meeting Burner, Webinar Express, AnyMeeting. Now I've used, let me have a look at that, everything there except Adobe Connect, and I don't think I've used WebEx. I have tried most of them. If not live, then I've sampled them just to see if they're any better than the ones that I use. So I may have used all of those by now. There are many, many softwares available, but I still always come back to the same one, and that's GoToWebinar. It's the most expensive, but it's the best, and it's the one that most regular webinar users use themselves. GoToWebinar. I also like AnyMeeting, that's anymeeting.com, and Meeting Burner, which is meetingburner.com. They are both great softwares, but I like GoToWebinar more, and I've used GoToWebinar virtually all my webinar broadcasting life. You can also, for free, use Google Hangouts. Now, I'll talk to you separately about Google Hangouts because there are some ifs and buts with Google Hangouts. Let's talk about GoToWebinar first. This is what it looks like if you go to gotowebinar.com. It is the most expensive, and it's true to say that it is the most widely used webinar software. Anybody who's ever done several webinars, multiple webinars, they'll always say to you, frankly, GoToWebinar is the best one, and it is. The only problem with GoToWebinar is that the audio processing is very hard. Not the audio processing, the video processing, I should say. So if you want to do replays on GoToWebinar, they are really quite hard to do with GoToWebinar's built-in system. They use a proprietary video file, and frankly, it's not very handy. Now, I found a way around that. I'll talk to you about it later, but the way I found around that now is I just record my live presentations using a bit of software called Camtasia. I just bypass GoToWebinar altogether, but I would still use GoToWebinar as my chosen webinar software any day of the week. It's just quite simply the best. It's robust and very reliable. If you've got a software that drops out on you or has a big delay, you're going to get frustrated with that very, very quickly. It's extremely easy to use. It's very stable. You don't drop out all the time. Your screen keeps up with your voice. We don't want delay when you're doing slides. We don't want to see the slide that you're talking about coming in 30 seconds late. So it's very important to check that with your webinar software. What I love about GoToWebinar is it handles the automation process completely. So when somebody signs up to the webinar, GoToWebinar will give them 3 automated reminders, and you can set the intervals at an interval of your choice. I usually have an interval reminder of a day, 3 hours before the webinar, and an hour before the webinar to remind people that it's taking place. GoToWebinar handles all of that, and it handles the follow-ups as well. They've got great support. They'll get back to you and they'll be very, very helpful. And it's mobile friendly. In fact, all the softwares I show you are going to be mobile friendly. I wouldn't show you something that wasn't now because frankly, it's just no use for the modern world. Everybody's on mobile devices now. Everything has to be mobile friendly. And I've got to emphasize this, that most experienced online marketers prefer GoToWebinar. That's just the truth of it, I'm afraid. I have tried all the alternatives, but I always come back to GoToWebinar, as does everybody else. We all kind of want something else that's cheaper, and where the replays are easier to manage, but we still come back to GoToWebinar in spite of the frustrations because it's just the best service. That's what it looks like on mobile. You could log in on a mobile phone and you can watch the presentations on mobile devices, which is fabulous. And there's a quick summary of the cons of using GoToWebinar. It's very expensive, unfortunately. Sorry about that. So for 1,000 attendees, it's £299 a month. Now, if you're a bigger company, you're not going to think twice about that. And if you're making a lot of profit, if you're selling high-ticket items, you're not going to think about that. If you just make 1 or 2 sales, you're going to make that money back in no time at all. But for smaller businesses, you're going to have to think twice about that £299 ticket for 1,000 attendees. But let's look at the detail of this. We can still get 100 attendees for the very affordable price of £59 a month. Now, the reality is that most businesses aren't going to have 1,000 attendees on a webinar. Most businesses are going to have up to 100 attendees. So let's focus on the £59 a month pricing, and that goes down if you get an annual plan, of course. So it can be pretty cheap for most people who are using it. And I would go for the 100 attendees level. I would go for that one. And I think £59 a month, that's very affordable at that price. And the other thing is, I even wrote a blog post on it once showing people how they can get around the problem. Video processing is horrible on GoToWebinar, but using Camtasia, which I'll talk to you about a little bit later, we can get around that fairly easily. The other software that I love is AnyMeeting. AnyMeeting.com is the address. AnyMeeting's great, nothing wrong with it at all. Until recently, AnyMeeting would let you have up to 200 attendees for free, and the only con of that was that you had to have advertising on your webinar presentation, but it was not obtrusive, it was not a problem. And then they've stopped doing that, which is really frustrating because I would recommend everybody try AnyMeeting first and then progress to GoToWebinar. Nowadays, unfortunately, you can get a free trial, but you've got to pay for 30 people, $18 a month or $180 a year. That's a perfectly reasonable price. It's a perfectly reasonable number of attendees for most smaller businesses, but it's a real shame that they don't do that free option anymore because it was great. It was very, very handy. So I would have recommended that you try AnyMeeting first. Now, though, I'm going to say start with Meeting Burner. Again, I love Meeting Burner. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's a lovely bit of software, very easy to use. But they limit you. You can get 10 attendees for free forever, which is great. But there's always a disadvantage. Can't record the meetings and we can't use the autopilot features. So we've got to pay at least $40 a month to get up to 50 attendees and to record the meetings. So you really have to make judgments about how many people you think you're going to have in your webinar and how important recording is for you. I would always look for recording if I were you. I think it's very important to record webinars. So you're going to have to make some choices about your budget and what sort of features you want here. But what I would probably recommend is to try Meeting Burner, get that free trial and just see how you get on with it. Maybe use it just to cut your teeth. Same with AnyMeeting, get something very cheap just to cut your teeth. But if you start to do this at scale, you do it regularly, I would look at long-term GoToWebinar, because if you're doing this at scale, if you're getting a lot of attendees, quite simply it is the one to use. And it would still always be my first choice for a webinar software. I've got to mention the new kid on the block, and that's Google Hangouts. Now, it's very important for me to emphasize here that I'm not talking about regular Google Hangouts. I'm talking about Google Hangouts on air. There are different things. Google Hangouts is the one that you can use usually up to 10 people. It's just like a Skype video call where people can put funny little hats on and do funny things while they're chatting. It's more of an informal thing, Google Hangouts. Hangouts on air are for business. They're Google Hangouts at scale. In theory, you can have as many people as you want on a Google Hangout, and that has to be one of the advantages of a Google Hangout. And they are a brilliant innovation. I love them. I would definitely say that Google Hangouts are a game changer, and the great thing is that they're free, very customizable, but they have some limitations. I've done a lot of offline experiments with them. I am not confident enough in Google Hangouts on air to do a live broadcast with a lot of people. I would still go for webinar software. They are mobile device friendly. That's the other great thing about Google. Now, normal Hangouts just allow 10 people, but Hangouts on air is the most similar replicable experience for a webinar. And the other great thing about Hangouts on air is that when you're doing your live presentation, it live streams into YouTube and it records it automatically as a YouTube video. Now that's brilliant. If you've ever had problems processing GoToWebinar video, that's absolutely a godsend. It is a wonderful thing. It just automatically records it. There it is at the end of the presentation, available in YouTube. So that's a very good thing. And a lot of people use Hangouts on air, and you can reach a global audience. But here are the disadvantages. You can't register attendees. And I think that's really, really important, because if I'm advertising a webinar, at the very least, I want to get your telephone number or your email address so I can follow up with you. And we can't do that on Hangouts on air. You can't send out reminders. So once people register, that's kind of it. There's no automated reminder service. Now, people will forget. If you think about all the things you sign up for, I bet you forget many things that you signed up for. You think, where did that come from? Oh, yes, I signed up for that a week ago. And that's the problem with these. You want to be sending reminders to people. You need to tell them, and tell them again that the webinar is on. And we can't send those follow-ups to attendees and non-attendees. Now, I told you earlier on that the most lucrative webinar that I ever co-hosted, we made virtually 50% of the sales on the follow-up. So you really need to be following up when you do these presentations. You can't do that with Hangouts on air. You can't make in-presentation offers, which you can do with webinar software. They don't get the webinar data. So GoToWebinar, for instance, will give you a digest, a little graph information of how many people were attentive and how many links were shared, and it'll give you a digest of all the questions that were asked in the chat box. Very, very useful. And Hangouts on air won't do that. We can't capture leads via any kind of registration process. That's difficult. It doesn't make the time zone conversions easy. Time zone conversions are really important when you've got an international audience. And let's face it, most online audiences are international. And I do find with Hangouts on air that they freeze and jam a lot. It's not very good. Often, if you've got guests on a Hangout on air, the guests will have to reconnect because their line's frozen. It's just not very professional. So they are brilliant and they are free. And it is amazing that Google offers these, but they're just not quite there. Not for a professional presentation, not in my view, and not when you've had experience of decent webinar software. Now, this is going to come with some provisos because there are some fantastic products being developed around Hangouts which get over those problems I've just mentioned. If you use something called Webinars on Air or Webinar Jam is the one that I use and I've bought. If you use those with Hangouts, they integrate with Hangouts and they do all those things that I've mentioned to you, like registrations and follow-ups and all the cool things that you would expect to do as an online marketer. Both of those products are really innovative, they're excellent, they're well worth looking at. My product of choice is Webinar Jam. I've paid for that because I like it so much. They still don't give me the level of control that I get in a webinar, so I still wouldn't use them for regular events, but they're very interesting. And if you really want to use Hangouts on Air, Google Hangouts on Air, then give them a try. They are very good, they're just not quite as good as webinar software. This is what Webinar Jam looks like. I have paid for this. I keep this in the wings, but I haven't quite yet had the confidence to go live on air with it. I still always go back to GoToWebinar. It's always my preferred version. But as you can see, it's very straightforward. It talks you through setting up the webinar, the registration process. You can even take payment for people to watch the webinars if you want. You set up integrations and notifications. You can even have lovely cool things like countdown boxes to the webinar to create that real sense of event. And Webinar Jam will also create the replay for you, which you can then send out automatically. It's a beautiful bit of software, very, very good, and it's used by thousands of people. It's just not my personal choice just yet, even though I do own it. I have paid for it. Webinars on Air, I've also tried. I went for Webinar Jam in the end, only because I got a good price on Webinar Jam. Webinars on Air is great because you can pay for it monthly. You don't have to pay for it up front as you do with Webinar Jam, so you can try it out. It's a very good piece of software. It does all those cool things that we want a piece of software to do. So what I would say to you is try them out. Give them a try, check them out, see which one you think might work best for you. I want to give you some practical webinar tips now. This is when you're presenting your webinars. It's always best to keep to about 60 minutes duration. People can't concentrate for that long. So this presentation that I'm doing today, I've got a little countdown clock on here. We're about 45 minutes at the moment on this presentation. I don't want to take it over an hour because it's too much. It's a long time for people to concentrate. Now, this is a video. If I were doing a webinar presentation, I would have a question and answer session at the end. So I would make the presentation and then I would let you ask all those important questions that you have at the end. Now, clearly this is pre-recorded. We can't do that, but I would always have a question and answer session at the end of a webinar, generally allow 10 minutes for it. The other thing about webinars is you should respect people's time. So if you say the webinar is going to be 60 minutes, then keep it to 60 minutes. Keep the content to 60 minutes. Often I've done webinars where there have been so many questions, it would be a disservice to the people attending for me not to answer those questions. So in that scenario, I make sure that I've taught the content and respected people's time and delivered that by the time that I said I would. And then I say to people, we'll send out the replay. If you need to go now, that's fine. But I will continue the webinar for a bit longer and I'll keep taking your questions for as long as you want to ask them, and I do that as a service to people. But the content, you need to keep it within the prescribed time because people find it very annoying if you go way over the time. It's a good practice to get ready for your presentation early. Don't just roll up at the last minute and switch it on. And what I usually do is I get everything live about quarter of an hour early, and I just leave a slide there so that early attendees can see it, and it says welcome, the webinar will start shortly. And usually about 5 minutes before the webinar begins, I open my microphone and I greet the early arrivals. I just let them know that I'm there. I do a little microphone check. That's always worth doing, and saying, can everybody hear me? And then they can respond. That gives you 5 minutes to sort out any microphone problems that you may have before the beginning of the presentation. But I just let people know I'm there, and then I count down, and then we go live when everybody's there, usually right at the start time. That's the best practice because a lot of people will be there early waiting for the presentation to begin. I've already mentioned this to you. Always have your glass of water with you. That's mine. In case you start to struggle with your voice. You will struggle with your voice over a 45-minute to hour-long presentation. So I can't emphasize that enough. It sounds like it's a trivial thing. It's really, really important. The other thing about webinars is, and I've learned this the painful way, when you take questions at the end, it's best not to open people's microphones and let them speak to you on air. If you're going to do that, always make sure it's with somebody who you've spoken to beforehand. So I have had guests on webinars, but we've always tested their rig before the webinar went live, because there's nothing worse than you saying, oh, Fred's got a question now. Fred, do you want to just connect your microphone and I'll just open you up on the line? And then Fred's there, he hasn't got his microphone plugged in, he can't hear you on his headphones, and it's a bit of a mess for people listening. So I've just learned from practical experience, unless I have tested it with somebody beforehand, before we've gone live, I don't open up people's microphones on the air. I let them use the chat box. Now, the other thing about that is if you've ever done question and answer sessions, you'll know that some questions get asked half a dozen times, and some questions, frankly, take you off the beaten track. So I like to triage my questions, and what I tend to do is I ask people to put questions in the little chat box which you get on webinar softwares, and I scan them and I look for questions that many people are asking, so I can deal with one question and help many people at once. I look for the most pertinent questions, but it also allows me to skim over the ones that frankly take me off at a tangent or in a different direction. So don't open the microphones, use the chat box. That's my tip for you. Moving on then, do break yourself in gently. If you've never done a webinar before, the best model is to just get somebody to interview, the interview an expert model. So if you are a flower arranger, for instance, you're a florist, get another florist to interview, and that takes the pressure off you that way. You could be there thinking, is the microphone working? Is everything working? Have I pressed all the right buttons? And you just have to ask your guest a question. They'll be talking away there, and it just means that you can check what's going on and just get used to the webinar software. So interview an expert is a really great way to get started, because it's quite a hike to do an hour and talk for an hour and control all the buttons for the first time. It's a bit scary. So I would always start with interview an expert. You could just ask the questions, you've got them all prepared, and while the expert is talking and taking the strain of the webinar, you can be there just checking that everything's working and the buttons are all working correctly. So that's certainly the model I would recommend that you start with. Never leave your PC speakers on, because you'll get that horrible howl and feedback. Always use headphones if you are talking to people on the webinar line. And the other tip is if you move your head too close to the microphone and your headphones are on loud, you will still get that feedback. So make sure your headphones are turned down as low as you can take it so that you can hear them, because we don't want those howl arounds. Another good practice tip is to switch off any notifications that you get on your PC. So at the moment, I've switched off Skype and I've switched off my email notifications so that while I'm doing this presentation, you don't keep getting these little pop-up boxes in the bottom right-hand corner. The other thing is that you share bandwidth with those applications, and you want as much of the bandwidth for your broadband dedicated to your presentation as you can. If your broadband is prone to drop out, or if it's a bit dodgy, and it feels funny advising you to do this in this wireless age, but when I do webinars, I actually wire them. I don't do it wirelessly. I get my old cable out and I wire it straight into the router, because it's much more stable when you do that. I really don't recommend doing webinars. You can do them wirelessly, but if it's a really important professional webinar, just stick the cable in the back of the router and do it the old-fashioned way. You'll find it a lot more reliable if you do that. The other thing is that if you are on a slower broadband connection, my kids used to hate me for this, but I used to throw the whole family off the internet when I was doing webinars. Now, in these days of superfast broadband, I don't have to do that anymore, and the kids are very happy about that. But when I was on a slower internet connection, I used to want all the broadband bandwidth to myself, so I used to throw the family off so that I had the dedicated resources for my presentation. It's a pretty good tip. The family won't thank you for it, but it really does help your presentation. You will regret it if you start to have struggles because one of the kids is downloading a big file and it's slowed down your presentation. So I can't really emphasize that enough. The other thing is to listen back to your webinars to see how you can make them better. This is a tip that I got from when I was on the radio. I would always listen to radio shows, maybe one a week. However painful it is to listen to yourself, you are your worst critic, by the way. You'll always be harshest with yourself. It's really important to listen back to things, because if you've got annoying habits, or if you keep saying a word or a phrase repetitively, you need to pick that up, because people listening will pick that up. Now, don't be too harsh with yourself. I've had to and ah and pause, and I've tripped over words during this presentation. Unless it's scripted, it's never going to be absolutely perfect. We need to feel that there's a human being behind the presentation. But if you've got annoying habits, you need to pick up on those. So please listen back to your webinars, and then you'll pick up on them as quickly as you can. And then I just want to emphasize using cables for better broadband stability. It's always best to use cables when you're doing webinars. Finally, the best webinar titles, the ones that tend to get sign-ups and people registering, tend to have a number in the title. So if you use titles like 10 ways to do this, 7 tips for doing that, 5 essential techniques, nice lists of, we call this what's in it for me, what people will get from your webinar, are very, very effective. So if your webinar is 5 essential techniques for getting a job, in your blurb to encourage people to register for your webinar, you need to say things like, in this webinar, you will learn number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. So tell people what's in it for them if they attend your webinar. And you should always share your best content, tips and techniques on the webinar, because you'll get more attendees and people will stay for the duration of the presentation. I mentioned right at the beginning of the presentation that I use dual screens. I've got 2 computer screens. That wasn't always the way. I had to start doing webinars on a laptop at a kitchen table, and I didn't have dual screens. And what I found is this software called Maxivista. It's at maxivista.com. You can get a free trial on it if memory serves me correctly, but it's very, very cheap to buy. I did end up buying it in the end because you could install it on a second laptop, and I think I had it on one of the kids' laptops, and it makes your laptop dual screen. It's an amazing bit of software. It's what you see on the screen there is exactly what you get. It lets you use an existing laptop or PC and it becomes a second screen. It's amazing. I do urge you to check it out if you do webinars and you only have a single screen. It's a great little bit of software. It's amazing. So how do we promote your webinar? You're happy to do a webinar, but you haven't got an audience. Where can you promote it? Well, here are some sources of free traffic to promote your webinar. Do a little video on YouTube to promote it. Make sure it's keyworded. So if you're talking about Facebook, make sure you use Facebook in the description. If you're talking about floristry or mechanics, make sure you've used the keywords in the YouTube video promoting your event and use that to encourage people to sign up. We can promote it on Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter. All the social media outlets are great for promoting. We don't have to pay for that, but if you do boost your posts or pay for advertising, you'll find that you can get a nice audience for your webinars pretty quickly. Why not write a post on your blog or your website or guest blog on somebody else's to encourage people to come to your event? Or you could use something called e-zine articles, which is something I used early on in my web career many years ago. You can write articles on e-zine articles and use that to drive people to your webinar presentations. Finally, if you don't have an audience already that you can promote to, why not consider using a press release using a site like freepressrelease.com. There are many of those sites. Just do a Google search for free press releases. There are some webinar directories too, clickfusion.com, webinarlistings.com and tweetmyevents.com. You could use all those three sites and they will list your webinar and hopefully they will get you an audience for your webinar too. Final thing I want to talk to you about is automating your webinars. The great thing about webinars is you can record them and then you can use them time and time again using webinar automation software. Now, I've never wasted a webinar. I've always recorded my webinars and I've made them available on my website. Certainly when I was doing selling a software and doing lots of internet marketing sales, I would record every webinar I did and make that available to people because it just helped to position me as the expert in my field, a go-to person in my field with lots of great information to share. Now, the automation process is simple. It's very, very powerful, and you could even automate these webinars on your Facebook page. Now, it's absolutely tremendous. I do love technology. My recommended piece of software is EverWebinar. This is the great piece of software to use. You can automate your webinars on Facebook, on your website, wherever you want to put your webinar replays. It does require just a tiny bit of technical knowledge. Now, a tiny bit of technical knowledge. I really don't mean a lot here. You don't need to be geeky in any way at all. And the instructions and the technical support is absolutely excellent with EverWebinar. Now, I've tested all of the automation services and this is the one that I've settled on. It's made by the same people who create Webinar Jam, and the guys who produce that software are internet marketers, very successful internet marketers. They know exactly how to make lots of sales online, and that's why I recommend their software. They know exactly what they're doing to help you to make sales. And EverWebinar is the best software for this. Hands down, it's great, absolutely great. It is expensive though, sorry about that. This is the bad news. It's $497 yearly. But if you're serious about this and you've got products with decent margin on, you're going to use this a lot. And I really do recommend that you automate if you can. It's just a tremendously effective way of just bringing in sales on automatic. And if you get webinars to work for you, if you do a webinar and it starts to work in a live situation, you absolutely must next think about webinar automation. It's very, very important for you. With EverWebinar, they're always adding great new features to the software. They're always developing it. It's very well supported, so it's well worth checking that out. everwebinar.com. Other services that I use and I recommend, Camtasia Studio I've used for many, many years. In fact, I'm using Camtasia to do this recording right now. I love this software. I use it very, very regularly. And I use Camtasia to record my live webinars so that I can process the replays. Again, it's not a cheap software. I think it's about £200, no more than £200. But I've used it virtually every week, I think, for years. It is a great investment of a software. That's Camtasia Studio. Brilliant for processing your webinar replays. And the other thing that I use to put video on my sites, on my website, is Easy Video Suite, easyvideosuite.com. This allows you, it's better than YouTube because it allows you to do great marketing functionality within the videos. You've got Facebook shares and you can put registration buttons in your videos and buy now buttons on your videos. So if you're really serious about online marketing, Easy Video Suite is a great piece of software to use. And again, I've used that for a long time now. Well, that's it for now. I hope that's been a really useful introduction to webinars for you. If you'd like to find out more, if you'd like to book a training session so that you and your team can find out exactly how to set these up and the best ways to automate them and the best ways to use online marketing to run webinars, then feel free to contact the Chamber of Commerce to book a session. I'd be delighted to work with your team, with your group, or with you individually to show you exactly how to use webinars. I've also put an article link there on the screen. It's on my blog if you want to find out more details about using webinars in an automated way or online. I put a special article online there which you can check out and get more information. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope it's been useful for you, and I do hope that you'll embrace the wonderful world of webinars very soon.